So we're going to look at how to set up these trig ratios very quickly in this particular video. And what we should know going into this thing is all similar triangles that have similar angles kind of follow these ratios. And the three most common ratios that you're going to see with triangles are sine, cosine, and tangent. And this kind of goes back to what we talked about before, where if we start kind of labeling opposites and adjacents and hypotenuse, so if this is angle B, the hypotenuse is across from the right angle, and then this side over here is opposite of B, and this side is next to B, then the sine of B is going to compare the opposite to the hypotenuse. It's opposite divided by hypotenuse. Adjacent over hypotenuse, that's going to be the ratio that's known as cosine, and then tangent is opposite over adjacent. So what does that mean to us? How can we remember the right order? Well, that's what this saying right here, Sakatoa, or as I mentioned yesterday to some of the folks that were in class, if you remember this saying, start right here with the S, as some old hippie caught another hippie tripping on acid. You can remember the right order, because some goes with sine, and then you put an angle, and then the O and the H stand for opposite over hypotenuse. And then cosine of the angle. Well, cosine goes with A and H. Well, that would be adjacent over hypotenuse. And the order of these letters that come after the trig function, so T stands for tangent, it would be opposite on top, adjacent on the bottom. So that saying, some old hippie caught another hippie tripping on acid, will put you in a position to label these things and to set up the trig functions right in order to start solving them later. So very quickly, if this is angle B, label each triangle. So the hypotenuse is across from the right angle. This would be the opposite side of B, and here's the side adjacent or next to B. There's B again, so the hypotenuse is here. Here's the side beside B, and then that leaves opposite for the top of this triangle. There's angle B, so the hypotenuse, again, across from the right angle. Here's opposite, there's adjacent. Here we go with angle B. So here's hypotenuse in that particular, right, or across from the right angle. Here's the adjacent side, there's the opposite. And so how this is going to play out for us, as we write these things with the trig ratios and with numbers, the first thing I'm going to do, we're looking in these first three examples at A. So I'm going to circle A and label the triangle. So 25 is the hypotenuse. 15 is opposite. It's across from A, and 20 is right next to it. It's adjacent. Well, remember, some old hippie caught another hippie tripping on acid. So for sine, we want O divided by H. So O in this case is 15 divided by the H, the hypotenuse, is 25. For cosine, we want AH. The A here is 20. The H is still 25. For tangent, we want the O and the A. So we go look here, 15 is the opposite, and the adjacent is 20. Right? If we switch angles, all of a sudden we're now going to switch angles to angle B. Well, I need to kind of readjust my triangle. I'm going to erase what's here, go back and readjust the triangle. 25 is still the hypotenuse. However, 20 is now the one that's opposite or across from B, and 15 is next to it. So just go through your sine, cosine, and tangent one more time. So S, we want the O and the H. So now my new O is 20, and then the hypotenuse is 25. For cosine, right, we want A and H. So there's my A, there's my H. So we want 15 over 25. And then for tangent, B, we want opposite over adjacent, which would be 20 over 15. So if you take a minute and fill in the next triangle on your own, I'll pause this for just a moment and you can try it, and then in just a second it'll pop right back up with the answers. And so that right there, those would be your answers for this particular triangle. One thing you should notice in both of these, the cosine of one angle is equal to the sine of the other angle, right? So the sine of angle A equals the cosine of B. Same fraction, same ratio. Same thing down here, so the sine of C is the same thing as the cosine of T. And the cosine of C is the same thing as the sine of T. And there's a relationship there. One thing we want to make sure we're good with before moving forward is just coming up with the sine, cosine, and tangent of angles using calculators, or even the online calculator that we've dealt with before, that Desmos calculator that I've showed you guys about. But the big thing, we want to make sure you're in degree mode. So if you have one of these TI-83s or 84s, there is a mode button So if you push that, it's about the third one down, you'll see radian and degree. You just want to make sure you select degree, then you can quit out of it. If you're going to use the online calculator, the Desmos calculator, desmos.com, after you pull that up, the graph settings, you can see the default are these things called radians. You don't want that. You want to switch it over to degrees. At which point, we can now start to solve some of these. So the sine of 60. So if I type in here sine of 60, it'll give me a decimal. So the sine of 60 is 0.860, or 866, excuse me. So the sine of 60 is 0.866. If I keep working through these things, so the cosine of 30, so I can literally just type cos 30. Well, it's the same exact answer, 0.867, or 0.866, excuse me. Struggling today. And just keep working your way through those things. What you should end up with, if you do the tangent of 25, you should end up with 0.466. And what this tells you, these are just ratios of sides. So one way to kind of think about this, if you had a triangle with a 25-degree angle, the ratio of the opposite side to the adjacent side, one should be about half the size of the other, right? 0.466, that's close to 0.5. So that should tell you that one of those should be about half the size of the other. That's one way to kind of think about it. So one last thing here, let's make sure we're good to set these things up before we start solving. So here's how it's going to work to start solving, right? Before the previous page, we just set them up, right? We're just setting up, all right, which one's opposite, which one's adjacent. Let's make sure we can set up the ratio. Well, the big reason that we want to start using trig is to start solving some of these. So kind of 3 steps that I'm going to encourage you to follow as you do this. All right, step 1, we want to circle the angle. So we're going to circle the angle. Just as a heads up, the right angle is off limits. So you don't circle that one ever. All right. Step 2, you're going to label based on your circle. So you're going to label the sides. And then step 3, remember the angle will go with your trig function. So this will kind of make sense all here in just a minute. So the first thing, number 1, the angle is 30. So we're going to label the rest of the sides here based off of that 30. Well, 20 is the hypotenuse. And then x right here, that's across from 30, so that's an opposite. Remember in our some old hippie caught another hippie tripping on acid, if we look carefully, we got an O and an H. Well, the only trig function that goes with OH is S, which means we're dealing with sine. Right? So we circled, we labeled the sides. Now the angle goes with the trig function. So my trig function here, because I have opposite and hypotenuse, is sine. The angle is 30, so you're going to put 30 right there in the parentheses. Now, SOH tells us the right order, which means O goes on top. O here happens to be X, and the H is 20. Same thing for number 2. Step 1, circle the angle. X will be the hypotenuse, right? We're crossing right angle, and then 10 is the adjacent side. So here we've got AH, and that plays out with the C. So that's cosine, drop your angle in, and then adjacent on top, which will be 10 over X. And then we'll start solving these in a later video. Right now it's just setting them up. Let's set it all up. And then so finally, circle the angle in that third example. X is going to be opposite. 12 is going to be adjacent. I could label the hypotenuse, but there's nothing of use to it. There's no letters, no numbers, so I'm just going to let it be. I've got an O and an H, which plays well for tangent. So tangent, the angle is 43. And this tells me to put opposite on top, OA, over adjacent. So there's your setup.